So next week, we'll talk about being sexually generous, sexual generosity in marriage, and that's part of this one flesh conversation. But this week, we're talking about emotional generosity, and I'm a little hesitant to separate these conversations into 2 weeks because they're not separate. These two things go together. And some of you know just how much damage has been done when you've tried to separate the sexual from the emotional. Like it has not worked. And so both of these things come together to help us understand the one flesh desire that God has for husbands and wives. So we'll talk about the sexual side next week. This week, we're talking about the emotional side, but understand that these two things go together. A Hebrew word for intimacy, this oneness, that is described in Scripture would literally be defined as a mingling of the souls, a fusing together, this oneness where you can't tell where one ends and another one begins. That's the kind of closeness God originally designed marriage to have. And so how do we experience that? How do we experience that? I think emotional generosity moves us closer to that kind of intimacy. A marriage researcher and relationship expert, Dr. John Gottman, separates couples into two groups. He calls them the masters and the disasters. And he explains the difference between the master and the disaster. He observed all kinds of couples, and he noticed that throughout the day, married partners made requests for connection. He calls them bids. So whether they knew it or not, they were making these constant requests for connection called bids. For example, here's the example that is given. A husband who is a bird enthusiast, notices a goldfinch fly across the yard. He tells his wife, "Look at that beautiful goldfinch." But don't miss this, he's not just commenting on the bird, he's requesting a response from his wife, a sign of interest, a sign of support. It's a bid for an opportunity for her to be emotionally generous. Now the wife has a choice. She can respond in one of two ways. Gottman says she will either turn towards or turn away. Turn towards or turn away from her husband. And though the bird bid seems like something very minor, he says it actually reveals a lot about the health of a marriage. The bird was important enough for the husband to mention it to his wife, and the question is, will she be emotionally generous by turning toward him, or will she turn away? Remember what we talked about last week, that this generosity in marriage is marked by this statement of, if it's important to her, it's important to me. If it's important to him, it's important to me. Will she respond in a way that reflects that? Gottman says that people who turn toward their partner in the study did so by engaging the bid, by showing interest and support in the bid. Those who turned away responded minimally, "Oh, that's nice," or ignored the bid altogether. In marriages that were headed to divorce, they expressed contempt with the bid. The husband says, "Look at that beautiful goldfinch," and the wife says, "I cannot believe I married a bird enthusiast." Like it's that. Stop bothering me with the birds. I don't know the difference between a goldfinch and any other bird that I could even reference to finish the sentence, but like there's this contempt. And these bidding interactions, he says, have a profound effect on the intimacy, the marital health in that relationship. He says couples who had divorced 6 years after this experiment had a turn towards bid at the time of 33%. They turned towards each other 33%. But he says 6 years later, the couples who were happily married during that time, and still married, had a turn towards bid of 87%. That 9 out of 10 times they were being emotionally generous with their spouse's bid. And so I just want to talk practically using scripture to understand 4 ways that we can be emotionally generous with our spouse. 4 areas where there are constantly these bids where we have opportunity to turn towards.